Folks, that's fun. I don't care who you are. That's fun. Um, I'm not gonna lie. I'm trying to think of like how do I approach the subject? How do I talk about what I want to talk about with other business owners, with other entrepreneurs, and and hit the mark without a talking for 3 hours, b um, coming off crazy, right? But here's the deal: I'm not crazy. I'm not. I'm not. I'm not nuts. I haven't lost my marbles. There were times. There were times when a combination of the media and family and people around in different circles would make me think that I was a little bit nuts. Um, or look at like a conservative mindset as being as not being in touch. Do you want to be on the right side of history? Um, all of these things that people say over and over and over again, and then I look back and I go, well, that was right. That was right. I'm not crazy. I have a track record of not being crazy. I can remember I was hired as one of the head trainers that taught people in Los Angeles County how to use the Dominion voting machines. So I was training technicians on how to service these things in the field, and we would train hundreds of people. And this was during the pandemic. This was the 2020 election. This was the recall election for Newsom. This was the 2022. There was a 2022 like midterm election. And something very interesting happened during all of that, right? There were rules about um, the pandemic, right? Do you need to be masked? Do you not need to be masked? Yeah, we're going to wipe it down with alcohol. Oh, don't wipe them down with alcohol. That ruins the machine. Do this, do that. There was all these things going on. And I remember trying to ask what I thought were logical, intelligent questions during that time. Like, if someone's in a booth by themselves, do they have to be masked? And are we going to videotape this? I thought the voting was supposed to be sacred and you couldn't videotape inside there. I thought, so now we're not going to have booths. We're going to use these machines. We're going to do this. It was like whatever you asked at the time. No, you have to be 6 feet apart. No, you have to wear this mask at this time. Now, you know what? No one's here. We don't have to wear the masks right now. Are we just wearing the masks when people can see us? Or are we just wearing the masks? What are the masks for? And you start asking these questions, and people treated me like I was crazy. And then started the vaccination thing. Well, Kurt, you got to get vaccinated if you're going to be teaching these classes. I'm not getting vaccinated, but you got to be vaccinated if you're going to teach these classes. Well, aren't the people that are worried about this going to be vaccinated? So if they're vaccinated, why do I need to be vaccinated? Why am I getting vaccinated to protect them? They're vaccinating to protect themselves. I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about it. And these fights would happen. Now, same contract, same contract. For 3 years, I worked this contract. For 3 years, best trainer, best results, best students, best everything, right? Everything's so great. Everything's wonderful. Now, look at me. Okay, so I'm fair to say you can make some assumptions. I'm not Hispanic. I'm not African American. I'm not a female. Uh, not gay. Um, Accolades the whole time. You're the best. You're the greatest. Best results. Best this. Best that. Demonstrably, over and over and over again, the best. The last class I taught, someone from the county showed up, a person of color, a female person of color, and they said that I had used euphemisms in class that are typically only reserved for people of disadvantaged status. So they fired me. I want you to picture this: 3 years, 3 years on contract, being the best, the best productivity, the best efficiency, the best retention of students, the most positive surveys, all these things. One person comes to class, a female person of color, works for the county. They would not tell me who specifically. I did not get a chance to even hear what it was that I said. What did I say that was so offensive that you have to fire me today? But I got fired because they said that I used euphemisms in class that are typically reserved for disadvantaged people groups. Now, I want you to think even deeper about this. There's a reason why I'm the best trainer. There's a reason why I have the highest retention. There's a reason why I get the most positive surveys. And that's because I identify well with my audience. The first thing a professional trainer does is goes, who's my audience? Who's here? How do I communicate with these people? How do I communicate with this group of people in a way that creates retention, relationship, right? How do I do that as a professional? Now, if you're an organization that purposely goes out and tries to recruit absolutely every other demographic than white males, why would I get up in front of a classroom and behave like Dave Chappelle's, whitewashed character from the news? I mean, think about this. As an expert trainer, as a trained public speaker, presenter, and leadership, expert, why would I get up and pretend to be a hyper white person in front of a room that has goose eggs for white males? So is it racist that I would associate, that I would uh, grow relationships with, that I might repeat a euphemism that someone says in class? Is that so offensive that you'd have to fire somebody? One strike and you're out? Well, that's where we were with that one. And I found it so unique. Now, I went through all of it, right? First I was in disbelief. Then my feelings were hurt. Then I was angry. Folks, I ran through these in like the first 2 hours after getting fired. I mean, I was like disbelief, feelings hurt, angry. And finally I got to apathy. I got to, if these people, and I'm saying this very much on purpose, if these people can't accept that they've had the best results with this person, regardless of my looks, my appearance, my voice, my speech, my all that stuff, if they're so incensed at my success because of this, that to me is, I become apathetic to it. Like, obviously, it doesn't matter. Now, I'm telling you this story right from the very beginning because, on one hand, I'm saying it doesn't matter. On the other hand, it really does matter. Why? Because if I'm going to be economically sustainable and and provide for my family and do these things, I've got to figure out how am I going to integrate with society, knowing that I'm not crazy and still be sustainable. I want to take you to just this morning. So now I just told you about 5, 6 years ago. Now I'm going to tell you about this morning. This morning, I'm on a Zoom call, and I'm on a Zoom call with other professionals in my field. And I have an innate respect for the work that these people do, for the content they bring to the calls, I've got a lot of respect for a lot of things. But sure enough, there's someone there on the call, and it's like, so what do you do? What do you do with your time? Well, I protect democracy. I Sounds great. All the buzzwords start coming out, right? Disadvantaged people groups, equity. So all of these words, they're positive sounding words, but they're not positive sounding words to a person that looks like me, right? Looks like me, works like me, does like me. Um, think about what I do in the WordPress space. I applied to talk for WordPress, and they told me that my talk was too centered on business. I can't make this up. People, I submitted the talk and I said, here's the talk I want to give. I want to help people grow their businesses. And I didn't get selected for the talk. And I'm not mad that I didn't get selected for the talk. That's not where the anger comes from. That's not where the disbelief comes from. The disbelief comes from the comments afterwards. Like, you pick somebody else, you pick somebody else. That's cool. 150 people apply to speak. You pick 10 of them. I'm not one of the 10. I get it. I'm good. Right. But then the feedback comes, well, your talk was too focused on business. It's a business convention. I'm confused. What are we going to talk about? And at that particular word camp, there were talks on security, which I thought was great. There were talks on databases. Hey, that's great. But then there were talks on being a person of a disadvantaged people group and the disadvantages of having to grow your business in a vertical of business that only requires a laptop and access to the internet. I know that I make this sound overly simplified, but there is no disadvantage to getting started in a WordPress based agency business. If you have access to the internet and a laptop, you can be in business. You can learn. You can take free tutorials. There is no cost of entry to join the WordPress ranks. And so when I take a look in the WordPress inner circles and people are talking about disadvantaged people groups and we need more for this and more exposure and we got to get well, here's an idea. They say there's too many white males presenting at WordCamps. Well, how many people that aren't white males are applying to speak at these events and qualified to speak on topics that serve the rest of the community? So I get really stumbled on that. And I go back to, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. When I was really battling the Battle of the Bulge, working for Ducati, and they were sending me over to Europe all the time, I would, I'm not complaining, by the way, that was great. I would go over to Europe and I would eat whatever I wanted. I would drink whatever I wanted. And then I'd come home to America and I would get on the scale and I would have lost 3, 4, 7 pounds in a week. Now that's huge. Now remember, I was a bigger person then. I was bigger. But I would lose all this weight. So I started going over to Europe and watching what I was eating. So now instead of gorging, like acting like an American, instead of gorging on all this food on a business trip, I said, let me just eat normally. Let me eat what I would normally eat if I were in the States. I'm going to have a modest breakfast. I'm going to have a light lunch, and I'm going to have a decent dinner with coworkers, and we're going to share a bottle of wine. Okay, so let's say that's normal. That's day to day. Do that for a week. Boom, 10 pounds. Lose 10 pounds. Just like that. I thought, am I nuts? Am I crazy? What's happening here? And then, that's when Supersize was big on cable television. And so people were watching that video, Supersize. And then there was Food Inc. People were watching Food Inc. I watched Food Inc. And I was like, wow, our food supply is horribly tainted. That's weird. We're supposed to be the most powerful country in the world, and our food is poison. So then I started focusing more on whole foods, less on, and I always thought that I did eat kind of healthy, but there were a lot of things that, I thought I was eating healthy, but it's not healthy because it says it's healthy on the package. It's not healthy. And then I started to really look at the food pyramid before the government flipped it upside down. So I was looking at that and I was saying, hey, this carnivore diet has some merit, right? Hey, this beef tallow thing has some merit. And so we stopped. We stopped with canola oils, we stopped with all the seed oils, the grape seed oils, and all, we stopped with all of that. We use olive oil in my house, and we use beef tallow, and we use real butter with salt. And that's it. And I started doing that years ago. Years ago. Not recent, years ago. Bobby Kennedy Jr. gets into position, flips the pyramid upside down, and everybody has a heart attack. For years, I was talked to like I was crazy. For years, I was told I should have been vaccinated. For years, I was told I need to reduce the beef in my diet. For years, I was told I should eat more vegetables, right? And then you start looking at how we've modified vegetables over the decades, and you realize, hey, some vegetables you really just don't even want to eat. You don't even want them near you once you find out what's actually in them or what they actually do. And I go back to symptoms and root causes. I'm not crazy. I've been looking at things, trying to be like an open mind, trying to look at things and go, okay, does that make sense? Does that not make sense? Here's what didn't make sense. And this has been a heartbreaker for the last week or two, and it's been following me. And I'm doing my best to put it in a back drawer of my brain's file cabinet. I'm trying to get rid of it. But, pre-pandemic, I came across some information that I thought was weird. And it was like, why are all these powerful people emailing each other about the kind of pizza they like? Now, back then, I was like, well, who cares what powerful people email each other about? Like, that to me just seems stupid in the first place. But it kept getting pushed, and then people started ending up dead. People that were, coming out with, say, hey, so and so, was found dead from suicide. Yeah, another suicide happened. They were in the middle of making a documentary about what? Abusing children. Well, that's weird. Why were they making a video about abusing children? Like, they're a rock star, or they're from the movies. Um, and then I would think to myself, well, that's weird. And little bits of information would come towards me, right? And I would say, no, 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 no. That it's too weird. It's too weird. There's no way that I could believe that, all of the leaders of the world are in some kind of weird cabal, and they fly children around the world to abuse them and worse. Um, and then some of the worst stuff really started to bubble up, and people started talking more openly about it. But when they would talk openly about it, it was always in the air of like, well, this is crazy, this is stupid, this is unbelievable, that would never happen. And then Jeffrey Epstein ends up going to jail, and everybody goes, oh, you mean the island was real? And then we all kind of freak out just a little bit. And then we all complain about the Epstein files not getting released. We complain for years. People argue about it. No one goes to jail. All of a sudden, Ghislaine Maxwell goes to jail. And we go, well, so it was real enough for her to go to jail. How come no one else is going to jail? This is a really weird situation. And so, in the middle of all that, still trying to figure out, how do I grow my business? How do I sustain my family? But in the back of my mind, there's always this really dark subject going on. And then you start to fall for it. You start to dismiss yourself. You start to go, well, maybe I'm a little crazy thinking about this. I mean, that it wouldn't really happen. Those people wouldn't really do that. Those rich and famous people wouldn't really get like a joke, get on TV and do weird things. Like, that's, I mean, who would poke the bear like that? If you were doing stuff like that, you wouldn't tell everybody you were doing it. That's even more perverted. And then sure enough, we all find out. Yeah, yeah, all that stuff's pretty much true. All that stuff's pretty much true. All that stuff and worse is pretty much true. Um, when I would point out and have conversations with people, especially of a different political persuasion than myself, they would say I was crazy. Oh, you're crazy. You're following. Don't become one of those MAGA people. You're following in their footsteps. Careful, careful. You don't want to be on the wrong side of history. And I would say, yeah, but doesn't it seem weird that suitcases full of cash get flown to other countries through TSA and they don't get stopped or arrested or in, inquisitioned or nothing? And oh, well, you can't do that. That would be racist, or that would be. I'm like, what does race have to do with stealing millions of dollars? I just got lost. I couldn't make the correlation that other people were making. And it made me feel like, and I'm just going to be real transparent and vulnerable here. It made me feel like I'm missing something. I'm missing something. When ICE shows up in your neighborhood and starts arresting child pornographers, child traffickers, pimps, prostitutes, uh, fraudsters, and the public loses their mind and does everything they can to protect those people to the point that it blows out of control. And now both sides were overreacting, and things have gone nuts. And you're looking at that and you're going, okay, what are the root causes here? What are the symptoms? And what are the root causes? And the root cause is they were fighting to keep criminals in their own neighborhoods. If they would have just let the criminals get picked up, they would have been done and over with. In, out. Better yet, if the local government would have turned those people over from the courthouses, it wouldn't have had to go to we're going to throw a net over your community and round these people up. And so when I'm on the outside looking in and people are saying, yeah, but this and yeah, but that, and you're missing this, and that's racist, and that's white supremacist. This is over. Uh, fascist. I go, what? Not Nazis. What? My brain is not making those, synaptic connections. I'm not cashing into this. I'm going, there's fraud in your neighborhood. There's an abandoned warehouse down the road where the owner of that abandoned warehouse is getting $2.2 million a year to take care of 180 imaginary kids. Now, do those 180 imaginary kids really exist? And are they part of some kind of weird sex trafficking ring or something? Or do those 180 kids really not exist? And at any rate, is that abandoned warehouse doing anything to get $2.2 million of our money? I mean, that's where my head is at. And then people go, oh, well, the fact that you would even look at that makes you a racist. No, no, it doesn't make me a racist. It makes me question why are $2.2 million of my tax dollars going there? And they go, well, who brought it to your attention? Maybe they're the racist and you're just getting sucked into it. And okay, maybe, I don't know. But still, at the end of the day, you think that abandoned warehouse should get $2.2 million of your tax dollars to watch no kids when they're supposed to be watching 180 kids? Like, that's where things aren't making sense. Giant leaps aren't making sense. I have personal friends that are transitioning. We have a friend that's transitioning from female to male. We have a friend that's transitioning from male to female. And when I say that they're friends, they're friends. I see them in public. I see them through work. I see cordial, very nice. Hi, how are you? Try to call them by the right gender. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I'm going to tell you, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I misgender them. I apologize. Hey, I'm sorry. We're friends. I should do better. I'm trying to work on better. I struggle with this. I've known you for 6 years as this person, and now I'm trying to get to know you as this other person. It's a difficult process, and that's being human. That's being human. Okay, but when we look at the other side, when we look at it not granularly, but when we look at it from a wide scope in, right? Are these people generally depressed or suffering anxiety? Are these people generally on some kind of big pharma concoction? Are these people, as a people group, having ongoing unsteady social interactions? Right? There's a way to phrase this that's not incendiary, right? Just looking at data, right? Um, these public mass shootings and these things that happen. Now, is that because they decided to transition their sex? I'm probably going to say it's not, because I go back to what's a symptom and what's a root cause. What's a root cause? And I am suspicious, very suspicious, that a lot of the root causes go to big pharma, go to the chemicals that they're putting into people that are causing them to do different things. The side effects of a lot of these drugs are, increased thoughts of homicidal activity, increased thoughts of suicidal activity, increased thoughts of this or that. And you read it and you go, so you're making people a little wacky. You're making them behave in a way that's not acceptable. But we give it to them. Why? Because they're allowed to make millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars on it. So we are looking at stuff on the news right now where they're saying, it is upwards of above $30 billion in fraud through the state of Minnesota for daycares, emergency traffic services, assisted living. They're coming up with all these new verticals of services that were paid for but never rendered, and it wasn't just daycares. It's an ongoing, just wide swath. And then now they're coming up with whistleblowers and reports from as early as 2020 pointing all of this out, and they're pointing out that certain people in politics have just signed off on these and pushed for these checks to keep getting delivered. And in fact, at one point, the checks were halted based on fraudulent activity, and then a threat of suing over racism caused them to start the checks again, and discontinue the investigations. You can't wrap your head around it, folks. Um, for some reason, I know a lot of people and am friendly with a lot of people that disagree with me on this subject. I pointed out, and they go, "Yeah, but the only reason they had to do it, they had to do it because they're a disadvantaged people group. They couldn't make ends meet in America without coming up with some kind of fraud to make it happen. We caused it for them. We put them in that position. Hundreds of millions of dollars, like per offense, $30 billion. Can you even? Most people can't fathom what $30 billion really looks like, and that's just one area, right? Minneapolis, Minnesota. On sometimes they say Minneapolis, other times they say Minnesota, like it's the whole state. $30 billion just from Minnesota. Now, symptoms and root causes. Am I crazy? I'm not crazy. I know that I'm not crazy because when I think about the root causes, you get drive down to the simplest of things, right? Um, through all this, and as an entrepreneur, through all this, how do we interact, build relationships with people, stick to root causes, right? Stick to the core issues, and sustainably grow a future for us and our families, to produce for our families, to become economically sustainable, to interact within a society that seems less and less like society. Like how do we do that? And that's the biggest question. That's the biggest question. Now, as a person of faith, I know that I can read my scriptures. I know that I can pray. I know that I can occasionally get together with some like-minded people and have some very honest conversations. But out and about in this space that we have. For instance, when I'm on a Zoom call with people in my industry and someone's talking about disadvantaged people groups and equity and social justice and all these things, um, is it appropriate for me to go, "Wow, you're full of crap, shut up"? No, no, that's not appropriate. It's not proper behavior. And if that behavior were to come my direction for my thoughts and my beliefs, I don't think that would be proper either. Now, they might think it's proper, but it's not proper. Like, I'm not going to attack individuals, especially people that I have respect for in a relationship with. I might say, if they ask me something direct, I'll say, well, I think that we were a little separate on that. In fact, I had somebody of a differing political opinion on my podcast last week, and we just put that on the Manana Nomas podcast. They run an organization by women, for women. Women have been, screwed in the workplace for decades and decades, and they have it so hard and all these things. And in the back of my mind, I was like, wow, I really don't agree with what my guest is saying. And I was polite, and I did share some stories back and forth. But after the call, I said, that was a good exercise for me, because there's certain areas that you and I are very disagreeable on. And we had a nice conversation, and I had an interesting takeaway from that conversation, because I said, you think middle-aged white dudes like took all the jobs during the pandemic, but I'm going to tell you, I applied at over 400 jobs and didn't get one. Um, there was no way that during the pandemic, during Black Lives Matter, that someone was going to hire someone from middle management that was a white male. I had people specifically say, you meet all the requirements, but there's no way we can add a white male to the board at this time. There's no way we can add a white male to the executive committee at this time. We just can't do it. Please don't sue us, but that's the deal. And I shared that with her, and she seemed pretty shocked. And she goes, well, then who's getting all the jobs? And I said, well, it's interesting that you assume that those jobs were real. It's interesting that you assume that corporations weren't using job applications to aggregate shopper data or something like that. Just because your favorite female friend didn't get the job doesn't mean a white male did. Like, you're making crazy assumptions. Now, in my situation, when I didn't get certain director roles, I did find out that people unqualified with no history in the vertical got those positions, because the companies had to check those boxes and had to make their numbers make more sense to people that cared at that time. And what's been nice is, over the last half decade, the focus on that has kind of subsided a little bit because, well, especially with the help of Mr. Trump, we have seen, DEI has kind of taken a backseat to a lot of things, which I'm happy for. I'm happy for. And there's people that'll see this or maybe comment on it and say that, I'm a certain person or a certain way. But I believe in merit. When someone has the experience, the time in the saddle, the demonstrated leadership ability, and goes through your gamut of application processes, and then you turn out and say, I just can't add someone that looks like you and sounds like you to our executive committee. That is well, that ain't right. That ain't right. Now, people would say that that's what people have been hearing for hundreds of years on the other side of the argument. And I would say that's probably not the case currently. It may have been the case way back when, but it's not the case currently. And I feel it's very important that we make sure that, like, when all things being equal, things are equal. Not all things being equal, we need to get that pendulum keep swinging the other way. Same thing when it comes to, like, females. Females will say, well, men have so many more rights than we have. Well, name a right that we have that you don't have. And that's where we go back to root causes. Root causes are different than symptoms, and symptoms are different than perceived realities. Perceived realities are generally flawed. And so, if we're going to find a way or a pathway to success in this space, we have to make acknowledgments that we weren't crazy. There really were people flying children around the world and abusing them. There really were people in power that were doing very strange things with other people of power. There really are people stealing billions of dollars from our government, our taxpayer base, and redistributing that wealth in unethical ways all over the planet. And in the middle of all that, we have to keep our head on straight, and we have to figure out what's next for us as an individual. What is next for us so that we can become effective, productive, and sustainable for our families? And that, to me, is like big things funnel down. And at the end of the day, I have to reassure myself, thinking symptoms, thinking root causes, remember that I am not crazy, and that my effort has the ability to propel me and my family forward. That was a long one. Hope you have a great day.